Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. You're listening to the Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. Jake Fox is sitting right here in BC Studios, broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB, Rochester, Canandaigua, Brockport, Buffalo, upstate New York, and it's cold. It's just so cold for people with the wind chill. Why do they even give us the wind chill? They give us the wind chill. That's what it is. In reality, that's what it is. Just give us that number. Because there's wind, and it's -0, and people get into that kind of hunched position when they're pumping gas. And it's generally sad, but I like it in some kind of poetic way. But anyways, I don't mean to veer off track here. It is an honor. Today's guest was a nuclear physicist before becoming one of the best-known and most well-informed UFO researchers. You need to listen to this man, Stanton Friedman, if you don't know about him already. Well, wake up. Co-author of Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Top Secret, Magic, his controversial book about the Majestic 12. I'd like to get into that a little bit. Lectured at over 600 colleges, universities, all over the world. The man is a legend. Stanton Friedman, our guest on the Black Tower Show. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
I'm delighted to be here. Don't forget, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience with Kathleen Martin, Betty's niece, and also Flying Saucers and Science.
Oh, man. Check it out. Stanton Friedman.
And I left one out. The Science was wrong with Kathleen Martin and myself.
Wait, Science was wrong? Wait a minute. What happened there?
Well, Science was wrong. And there are 14 chapters, each one stimulated by some smart guy saying something stupid, like Man Will Never Fly. That was 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. Like space travel is utter bilge by the British astronomer Royal the year before Sputnik. And there are many other examples. We should really do a second volume because it is often that smart people say stupid things because of their arrogance and ignorance.
But that's how we have to advance. That's how humankind will advance. We take chances. We take risks. We have to change. Okay? Yeah. Now, but we have to focus. We can't be preaching right now because we don't want to waste Stanton Friedman's time. You're busy writing all these books. But let's go back to the crux. Okay. You've talked so much about the Roswell incident. Talk about your relation to it quickly, and then we'll get into and blast out some of the facts surrounding that.
I'd already been lecturing for a number of years. I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to speak at Louisiana State University. Was supposed to do 3 television interviews. People from the university brought me to the station. I did the first 2. The third reporter was nowhere to be found. Didn't have cell phones back there in 1978. And the station manager's giving me coffee. He's looking at his watch. He's embarrassed because he knows I have things to do because he knew the people who brought me there. Out of the blue, nobody else around, he says, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, who's he? His answer changed my life. He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you were interested in when he was in the military. What? Where'd that come from?
That's a good lead right there.
Yeah, so I said, what do you know about him? He lives in Houma, Louisiana. Well, that didn't tell me anything because I didn't know where Houma was. I've been there since to talk to Jesse when he was alive, of course. We're old ham radio buddies. And I found out years later that Jesse hadn't told him anything. He'd seen the article. There were articles in evening papers from Chicago West on July 8th, 1947. He'd seen the article in the Times-Picayune. And when I asked him years later, what had Jesse told him? He didn't tell me anything. He said, I can't talk about that. So I called Jesse the next day, to make a long story short, picked his brains. He couldn't deny involvement because his name was in newspapers all over the country. Right. And, as a result of sharing that information with Bill Moore, we, in a year and a half, located 62 people connected with the case. That led to the first book, The Roswell Incident, by Bill Moore and Charles Perlitz. It was 92 people by the mid-'80s. And I instigated the Unsolved Mysteries television program on NBC, which had 27 million people first time around and 30 million second time. This is before cable was a big thing, you understand, so big audiences. And so I am usually one of the featured speakers at the Roswell Festival. I will be there again this year, first week in July. Talk to all kinds of people. And I should mention, this is before the Internet. So finding people was hard work. It wasn't easy plug some names into lists. But it really intrigued me, and something that I take on all the nasty, noisy negativists, naysaying people, debunkers, whatever you want to call them, and almost invariably they leave out significant things. Like one of the most significant is the military group based in Roswell at that time was the 509th. They were the most elite military group in the world. They dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, both of them, and then two more in the tests in 1946. Handpicked officers, handpicked men. So this wasn't a bunch of guys sitting around twiddling their thumbs with nothing better to do than to make up stories. One of the excuses that one of the debunkers says that, that story was put out by some news PR guy who had nothing better to do and wanted some attention, which is absolutely absurd. Funny, he repeated the story 9 years later in a, quote, scientific, unquote, article about UFOs. So I wage war against the nasty, noisy negativists. Remember, there are 4 basic rules for debunkers. Don't bother me with the facts my mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble, and nobody will know the difference anyway.
It sounds like the illusioned America that we discuss on the show a lot.
Oh, okay. Well, these same rules apply in many other fields. Anything strange, you can use these rules. And the debunkers do.
Sure.
And that's why when I took on Michael Shermer, head of the Skeptic Society, we were on Coast to Coast for 3 hours debating one night, middle of the morning, middle of the night for me. I got 80% of the vote because he didn't know a darn thing about UFOs. And that's typical. The debunkers, right now I'm aching to have a debate with a well-known astronomer, Neil deGrasse Tyson, head of the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and he'll be doing the remake on Cosmos, Carl Sagan's program, you know?
Yeah, of course.
And he has said a number of dumb things about flying saucers because he doesn't know anything about them. And I put them in my columns. I do a monthly column for the MUFON Journal. And he just turned down, he was offered an opportunity to debate me at a MUFON conference. He turned it down, but he hadn't seen any of the articles, so I'm hoping I can needle him into, showing up for the debate and reveal his ignorance. And, I have no bones about saying that because, well, look, the astronomers, for some reason, feel they have to protect us against this nonsense about flying saucers. Because you can't get here from there, and people are lousy observers, and these other really silly arguments. What you don't hear them talk about is the half a dozen large-scale scientific studies that I talk about. You don't hear them talk about the published studies about interstellar travel. Now, even though the astronomers may be concerned about the universe, they don't get involved in propulsion system design. I spent 14 years in industry working on fission and fusion propulsion, nuclear power plants for space, classified programs. There's another area they know nothing about. So it's great fun because of their ignorance. Dr. Tyson said, as a splendid example of that, the proof that the government, can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia.
Oh, there you go.
That's a great line, but it is totally irrelevant to the question of can governments keep secrets.
Well, we know the government is keeping secrets. I mean, when you talk about cosmic Watergate, this is a term that you coined.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still happening. Still happening politically. We've had Dr. Paul Lavalette on the show talking about Davidics technology, and and it's funny that even scientific technologies that are out there now, those are being kind of pushed into the shadows. He makes the argument similar to yours, that even keeping the science behind it, keeping that out of the public eye, is an important sort of tactic.
Well, think of the Manhattan Project to develop nuclear weapons. One of the great events in our history, really, it was the first nuclear chain reaction under Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago. I'm an alumnus, so I have an oar in the fight. That was kept secret. We built a isotope separation facility, a gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge. It was a mile long. It was using 5% electric power in the United States. It was a lot of energy. That's why it was in Tennessee, because they had TVA. All done in secret.
What about the argument that a lot of what people are seeing, sightings and such, are these tests that are being done by our government, these sort of advanced technologies and things?
Well, look, there's no question that we have tested the far-out technology, that people have on occasion seen government vehicles. But the notion, the CIA tried to play this little game that once the U-2 started flying, which was built for the CIA, of course, then people started seeing more flying saucers. Dr. Bruce Maccabee has gone through that argument and looked at the data. The number of sightings did not increase. I mean, whoever heard of a U-2 that could land out in the middle of nowhere and take off out there and make right-angle turns? Forget it. Right. And the question isn't what are all UFOs alien spacecraft? The question is, are any? My answer is yes. I mean, a good baseball player, if he gets a hit 30% of the time, you don't say, well, he struck out 3 times yesterday, he's a lousy baseball player. Generally speaking, that's a hasty judgment.
I think people need to know.
Picture.
Sorry to interrupt, but people need to realize how many sightings are actually taking place. And
MUFON gets about 600 a month,
which is incredible. And I mean,
yes,
I just read in the news today in Iowa, lights over the skies there, and the initial articles that are coming out from there, people do not know what is going on there. They don't know what's happening there.
Of course not. And
what about China? They had to close a number of airports in China, 2 years ago, because of the military had no idea what was up there, apparently.
Sure. There's a lot going on, and there's no question. When you think about it, you can understand the cover-up. Because of, say, Roswell. If we recover the wreckage of an alien spacecraft and several bodies, game over. That takes care of it. It doesn't matter how many other cases have been explained. You got one that says, here it is, folks, And so you can understand the government has a number of concerns. One, we don't want anybody else to figure out how they work before we do. Every government in the world would love to build a high-performance vehicle with the flight characteristics of saucers. Up, down, back, forth, right-angle turns, silent, up and away. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to build that? Of course. And, if we have learned something from the wreckage, and I hope we have, we don't want them to know what we have learned.
What's the closest you've gotten? What's the closest you've gotten to actually seeing these crafts or just being near this kind of other intelligent life forms?
Well, as far as I know, I never have been, although the closest I've gotten is Kathleen and Martin and I. We wrote Captured together, and Science Was Wrong. We're being interviewed out in the woods in New Hampshire. We were on a hill, and the guy was down on a dirt road, nobody around, no lights, and, it was similar to the setting for Betty and Barney Hill. And all of a sudden, the guy running the camera, and he's some distance from us, more than 50 feet, says, "What's that behind you?" That never happens when you're being interviewed on camera. So we dutifully looked back, and up in the sky, behind the trees, there were some strange lights. a light over here, and then next to it another light, and next to that another light. And I don't know what it was, and we later figured out it was probably flares from the Vermont National Guard. These are flares to light up a battlefield now. We're not talking about flares behind a car parked along the road. But for the moment, and the funny thing is we went back to the hotel, and two women there said, "We got to talk to you guys." They knew what we were there for. And we saw these strange things today. And when they sketched what they had seen, it was very similar to what we had seen, but hours earlier. So that was close. And they filmed our surprise, so to speak. That's as close as I've gotten. Look, I chased neutrons and gamma rays for 14 years. You know, little companies, GE, GM, Westinghouse, whatever. I never saw a neutron or a gamma ray. I didn't have to see one to believe that they were real. So I don't need it. I've talked to enough people who have seen flying saucers to be satisfied that their testimony is valid. Again, that doesn't mean I think every sighting of a strange thing in the sky is a flying saucer from elsewhere. That doesn't mean that at all. It means some of them are, and that's enough for me. You know, when you're in the nuclear field, as I was for so long, you realize that sometimes low percentage things are very important. Uranium-235, which is needed for our bombs, atomic bombs, 0.7% of uranium is U-235. You could say, well, it's 99.3% not U-235. Why bother? You know, but no. Most chemicals that are tried to treat disease, most of them don't work. And they're more likely to kill you than to cure you. But fortunately, when you're sick, we have some that pass through the checkout line, so to speak. And so it's nice. Incidentally, I check my audiences, all 50 states, 10 provinces, and 18 other countries, so I get around. That's what happens when you're old. And at the end of my lecture, I never have guts enough to do this at the beginning. I say, how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer? Just raise your hand. I just want to point and count. We're not asking your name. We didn't let the CIA in, and so forth. The hands go up very slowly, gingerly off to my left, and I point and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time I get off to my right, the hands go up vigorously, because suddenly the people realize, oh, I'm not the only one. Typically, it's 10% of the audience. 10%, that's a lot of people. That's more people than have had polio, you know. And I then ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. If there's anybody left, I'll say, how many of you were in the military at the time? If there's still some hands, I'll say, you want to tell us about it? One guy in front of 1,300 and some people in Texas college campus told me, or shouted out, I can't, they told me not to say anything.
You have to wonder if there's this calculated stigmatizing of people who are interested in these sort of things. Yeah, I mean, that would be a good tactic by people that are, you know, trying to protect the information, and just demonize and make silly all of the people who even want to try to get close to the truth.
Oh, no question
about that. That tactic is used in many different ways. And that does seem to be happening. That does seem to be true, yeah.
Fear of ridicule is apparently a primary human concern, because when I ask people to come to my table, they want an autograph on a book and so forth, and they got to tell me their story. You know, they got me, and they're going to tell me. So I listen, and I say, did you report it? No. Why not? They think I was some kind of a nut. That's the general response. So I'm trying to lift the laughter curtain. Yeah. And incidentally, most people are willing to accept flying saucers. I've had 11 hecklers and over 700 lectures, and 2 of them were drunk. And you get that many if you talk about sports, religion, politics, stuff like that. I don't talk about those things, but that's what people tell me. So I tell people, don't be afraid to speak up. I've had a husband and wife come up to me afterward, and she says to him, how come you raised your hand when he asked about sightings? Well, I had one. Well, you never told me. Well, we were just married, and I thought you'd laugh at me, and so forth. So it's a major problem, but once you cut through that, people are interested. They're quite willing to be open, and I think one thing that's changed drastically is because of Kepler, the satellite that's finding all these planets, found all these planets.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't too many years ago that we thought we were it, man. One solar system, and we're the only intelligent life here. Pat Robertson says all the intelligent life in the universe is on planet Earth. Honest to God. I think he's wrong.
Pat. He's always smiling, Pat is. He's always got something wild to say. Well, our horizons are expanding. I mean, we're starting to realize now that planets like ours, there could be millions and
billions.
Planets. Yeah,
the general notion today is that there's about one planet per star. Some have 5 or 6, some have none, but the average. So in our galaxy, there's maybe only 100 billion planets. What the heck? The SETI people, and you know what I say SETI stands for, is Silly Effort to Investigate, SETI, not Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But they were quite happy to talk about there might be 8,000 people or places in the galaxy that could send us messages. A better number today is maybe 8 billion places.
Do you think we've begun colonizing the moon and Mars? And do we have
Not
the technology to travel the speed of light even faster than that? I mean,
we don't need to travel faster than the speed of light. And I worked on fusion propulsion systems. Now, you have to understand, every advanced civilization, and we're just getting there, despite our being a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. I mean, just look at us.
Easy.
Hey, people, I don't know whether they get taught this in history classes anymore or not, but in World War II, we nice guy Earthlings killed 60 million of our own kind. We destroyed 1,700 cities. I just heard yesterday on the tube that over 100,000 people have been killed in Syria by their own government. We're not nice guys, but let's get back to the technology thing.
Yeah.
You realize we went through the business of going from dynamite to atomic bombs to H-bombs, fusion. And everybody who's a little more advanced than us, let's say 50 years, which is nothing on a cosmic timescale, will know that the major source of energy in the universe is nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in all the stars. There's no guessing about that. That's what is happening, nuclear fusion. Yeah. We didn't find out until 1938, you understand. But we went from a 10-ton dynamite bomb in World War II, had to be carried by a blockbuster, it was called, carried by a big B-29 in 42, in 44, let's say. In 45, we developed our first atomic bomb, released the energy of 16,000 tons of TNT. By 1952, our first nuclear fusion device, H-bomb, if you will, for hydrogen, released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. And the Russians outdid us with one that was 57 million tons of TNT energy release.
Wow.
I mean, that's scary. I don't know about you, but it scares the heck out of me, and I'm a nuclear guy.
You know they got something up there like a laser. I mean, we've like Dr.
That's public at this point.
Yeah, Paul Lovely, yeah, but he says that there's a laser that can pick up just about anything. I mean, pick up a mountain or something. Maybe that's
but my point
like
is
we're there
that
already.
There's two things. One is that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. A laser is not just a better light bulb. Entirely different physics. I don't use a slide rule anymore. I did when I started work in industry, although these many years ago. But now we have calculators, which are a lot better. Everywhere you turn, we find changes in technology. But nuclear fusion, I worked on a study of fusion for propulsion way back in 1962. And if you use the right stuff in the right way and kick particles out the back end of a rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. 10 million times. That's a pretty good improvement. So what I'm saying, one of the things that's guaranteed to interest our visitors is to make sure that we don't take our brand of friendship, they all call it hostility, you understand, out there. Because I would bet you anything, if we survive this period of time, that within 100 years we could go to the stars. Now, I'm not saying there's no other system besides fusion, but I'm saying that's the obvious place to look, and we're already there. We know how to do it, but it would cost one heck of a lot of money. That's the difference. People say, why don't we build them? Because they're expensive. But remember, the Navy builds nuclear propulsion systems, not only nuclear-powered submarines. Do you realize that we have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that can operate for 18 years without refueling? Think about that a minute. That's a lot of stops at the gas station you don't have to go to, you know.
Right.
So nuclear fusion would do the job. You don't have to go to fourth-dimensional space-time warping and all this kind of stuff. I'm not saying those things don't exist.
So there's no people on the moon and Mars, because we've had guests on. They swear that we have already begun colonizing the moon and Mars, and then we were just watching this thing, Buzz Aldrin talking about this. The moon of Mars has this monolith on it.
Well, Courtney Brown, Cliff High, Peter Laviolette allude to these sort of things, but what their thesis is that the same people who found this technology with the alien spacecraft in Roswell, these same people have reversed engineered this technology, and they are on the verge, or they are already at the level of being a Type 1 civilization. They've become...
I don't think so.
Okay.
I haven't seen any evidence for that. As a matter of fact, there are also people who say we figured out free energy, and the military-industrial complex is keeping it from the people to make a ton of money. I don't believe that either. I'm not saying we haven't learned anything, not at all. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a weird example. What you would normally do, you got pieces of wreckage strewn about Roswell, and you send it off to the best labs you have that have guys with high security levels and great competence, and you say, first thing, what is this stuff? Guy comes back and says, I don't know where you got it. He didn't have a need to know for that. But this is a combination of two elements, samarium and cobalt. Why would anybody put those two things together? That's not your job. You send it off to other guys. What are the electrical, magnetic, thermal properties of this stuff? Well, I don't know what this stuff is or where you got it, but I measured the highest magnetic moment of any material I've ever measured, make a great permanent magnet. And as a matter of fact, that's where the ghetto blaster permanent magnets came from, samarium and cobalt. And you know where they were developed? I didn't find this out until years after I used this example. Wright Air Development Center. I just laughed my head off when I found out that's where the work was done. So we learned something. And as a matter of fact, there's a picture in my book, Flying Saucers and Science, of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module. And, it's a round, blunt body. But high-speed craft in the atmosphere is supposed to be pointy-nosed, sharp-winged, highly streamlined. And here we're using a round, blunt body. Well, turns out they were doing wind tunnel tests on round, blunt bodies at Wright-Patterson in 1947. I think the idea might have been stimulated, in other words, by, look at that, let's give it a try. Ooh, look what we found, But that's different from saying we've got it all worked out so you can build a bunch of them and make money in the secret world, and all that sort of stuff. So I think we have learned some stuff, and I'm sure we would learn more if there were more people involved in investigating. Secrecy can be overdone. On the other hand, I must admit now that I am not in favor of putting everything out on the table. But Stan, you talk about a cosmic Watergate. Why not? Because there is a national security element to this. Should we put what we have learned from Roswell and other crashes, there's the Aztec crash, for example, and Plains of San Augustine crash and so forth. Should we put what we have learned out on the table without the reference in the Chinese putting out what they have learned? I don't believe that. Sure. It doesn't make sense to me, So I used to get angry at the security people. They wanted to classify stuff that any college sophomore would know if he looked hard. But still, there are legitimate needs for national security considerations.
Can you talk a little bit before we run out of time? We're talking to Stanton Friedman, UFO researcher, author. activist? Could we call you an activist? I don't know. Maybe not. Informer.
Yeah, I'm an activist.
Yeah, an activist.
An activist ufologist. How does that sound?
There you go. That sounds good. Talk a little bit, because I want our listeners to know about the Majestic 12 group.
Yes.
Just get into that. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, remember now that we have the example of the atomic bomb project of people from many different places and many different skills all put together into the Manhattan Project to develop this incredible new weapon. Clearly, if there was a crash saucer and all the rest of this stuff, there had to be an organization to deal with it. The technology, and what can we learn more from our classified inputs, gun cameras, for example, radar systems, all this data is born classified, So we got a memo, a roll of film in the mail, actually, in 1984. One of my colleagues did, no return address, of course, and which there are 2 sets of 8 negatives each of a briefing for President-elect Eisenhower dated November 1952. This is after the election. He wasn't the president yet. He was president-elect. And in it says that President Truman established this group called Majestic 12 in 1947 after Roswell, named the members of the group, and it's an all-star cast. The first 3 directors of Central Intelligence, Secretary of Defense Forrestal, a bunch of scientists, outstanding group. And their job was to deal with the Roswell crash, and it says they had bodies and so forth. And the question is whether the document is genuine or not. And we were particularly careful about not going public because one of the people listed as a member was a Harvard University professor of astronomy who had written 3 anti-UFO books. Now, wait a minute. How could he be part of such a team? Everybody else had a high-level clearance. Well, you don't need a high-level clearance to teach astronomy at Harvard. Well, to make a very long story short, I had to get permission from 3 different people to see Menzel's papers at Harvard. Discovered to my total surprise, because I didn't like him when he was alive. All these guys were now dead. See how convenient. And discovered that he had a very high-level security clearance, did classified work for all kinds of agencies, was a world-class cryptographer, was on a first-name basis with Jack Kennedy, and he told Kennedy that when we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more about the National Security Agency, with which I've been associated for more than 30 years.
Oh, boy.
That's a pretty strong statement to a president. I've got a copy of the letter. And so I did a lot of digging and had to get his wife's permission to read his unpublished autobiography and so forth. And Menzel was up to his ears. He was leading a double life and highly classified stuff. There are 2 issues of Sky and Telescope magazine devoted to him, one when he died and one at the 100th anniversary of his birth. And neither one mentioned all his highly classified activity that he was involved in, which I find very interesting. And I talked to some people at Harvard who knew nothing about it. Well, once I found that Menzel belonged to this group, and the story is told in detail in Top Secret Magic. There's going to be a movie, incidentally, I hope.
Really?
Well, the options have been bought.
I like that.
For my book, Top Secret Magic, and Don Schmidt and Tom Carey's book, Witness to Roswell. And it would be sort of like All the President's Men, that kind of I won't say it. Well,
maybe you'll see this information getting out. Is there this trend towards, now I just read today, John Podesta, he's coming back to the White House. One of his big things is to declassify UFO information, these sort of things. Yep. Maybe you're seeing a trend. Maybe you see something happening here.
Maybe so. And, we'll have to wait it out. There have been times in the past when it was stated that we're expecting a big dump of information about flying saucers. That didn't happen, you understand. So I don't know. But the Majestic 12 documents, very controversial. And in my book, I deal with all the anti-arguments. Let me just give one. Philip Klass, who was a nasty, noisy negativist of the first degree, he never saw a sighting that he couldn't explain in a prosaic way, he claimed. Anyway, He said, one of these documents you say are real, Friedman, is done, this is the typewriter age, in the large pica type. But the National Security Council, it's an NSC document, used elite type. And I've got 9 documents here to prove that. I challenge you to show any other genuine, and he gave a whole bunch of things they had to meet criteria, document done in the same size and style type, and I will give you $100 each up to a maximum of 10. Of course, he'd never been to the Eisenhower Library, and I rechecked that, and it's true. I've spent weeks there. I've been to 20 archives. I like to have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. Anyway, I was going there in 2 weeks. He gave me 60 days, but I was there in 2 weeks. Picked up 14 pica-type documents that met all his criteria, sent him copies and an invoice for $1,000. He said up to a maximum of 10. And he paid me. Told everybody about challenging me and nobody about paying me.
That's what I'm saying, man. You won the bet. And the cover.
Well, I didn't have to put up anything, you understand, except information. But, I mean, that's typical. The Eisenhower Library had 250,000 pages of National Security Council material. And he's going to generalize from 9 to 250,000? That's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. I love the way that sounds.
Ooh, that's nice. All right, we got just a few more minutes with Stanton Friedman, UFO researcher. I'm just going to let you take a minute or so, talk about what you're working on right now, what's going on, how people can get involved, and just give us the dirt.
Okay. In a limited amount of time, I will tell you, go to my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. It lists all my books and papers and DVDs and all that sort of stuff. Lists my schedule for the coming year, which is growing, but includes 2 trips in the Southwest on the 2 days that Trinity site, where we exploded our first nuclear weapon, was set off in April and in October. And we'll go to Los Alamos and we'll go to Roswell. So it'll be an intriguing trip. I'll be sort of a tour guide, if you will. I love that part of the world, and they love me in Roswell. I will be speaking at the Roswell Annual Festival in early July. I'll be speaking this year at the annual MUFON Symposium, which will be just outside Philadelphia, also in late July. I'll be doing a show in Boise, Idaho, with George Noory.
We've had him on the show. He's great.
Sure, and there'll be lots of people there, and I'll have my books and all that. And I haven't got any deal yet on another book, but we've been doing some talking about it, and that might happen. But I do want, I hope I can get a chance to debate or discuss, whatever word you want to use, with Dr. Tyson, because it's time that these astronomers stop making stupid comments, which he has done. They don't know anything about national security. They don't know anything about advanced propulsion systems, and they don't know anything about flying saucers. But that doesn't keep them from saying there's nothing to it, you understand.
I'd love to have a debate here on the Black Tower Show. If we set up a debate, would you join and do a live debate on the show?
I'll take anybody on, anywhere, anytime.
You are the man, Stanton Friedman. Such a pleasure to talk to you. We'd love to have you back on the show again, and thanks for taking the time.
Sure. It'll be my pleasure. Thanks.
You take care.